Hey everyone, Adam Bergman here, IRA Financial, and I got Victor MacLaughlin of Capital2Market. And today we're going to talk about what is a private placement. And there's no one better to tell us than the expert, Victor. So give us the rundown, just in simple terms. What is a private placement?
Thank you, Adam. Private placement is essentially a private entity that would be accepting investments. So there's certain exemptions that private placements or private companies or private issuers, private sponsors utilize in order to raise capital. Some allow access for investors of all wealth to be able to invest in, and some limited to the amount of wealth that you might have or income that you might have as far as an accredited investor. So there's three exemptions that we focus on at Capital2Market. The first one would be a Regulation D offering. That means that only accredited investors primarily can invest.
Okay. Who's an accredited investor?
Accredited investor would be somebody who's defined as making over $200,000 a year for the last 2 years, or a married couple at $300,000, or has over $1 million worth of liquid net worth, or an entity that has over $5 million of liquid.
And there's also something about certification, right? You could potentially get into being an accredited investor if you work at like an investment firm or have a series.
Yes, very good point. So now if you're a registered representative, you get an access to being an accredited investor by having those designations or those registrations.
Okay. So talk to me. What's the difference between an Apple or a Google and a company that does a private placement? Are these public companies? Are they not public companies?
Good question. So the public company would be like Apple. Anybody has access to be able to purchase those securities. A private placement would be a company like Facebook before you saw its initial public offering. So they had a lot of private investors investing in a private company versus a stock market where you can go and buy or sell the stock very easily, whether it be on the New York Stock Exchange or on the NASDAQ. One of the downsides to private placements is that exactly that point is it's called a liquid. You're not able to sell it very easily to somebody else after you purchase it. So that's one of the downsides of investing in private placements. But on the upside is you want that liquidity event. You're investing in a company that's an earlier stage company and looking at that upside in the future, whether it be through an acquisition or an initial public offering, an IPO, or some type of liquidity event to get a return on your investment.
Right. So bottom line is private placements are used by small to large companies who look for growth, who want to raise money that aren't public, and they want to go to the public to be able to source the capital. And obviously retirement accounts, accredited investors are an important source of that capital because that money is used to grow these businesses, which hopefully in turn will create returns for the investors.
Exactly. And there's different funds as well. So private equity funds, and this is one of the points that we're very excited about working with IRA Financial. Typically investors that want to invest in a hedge fund or a private equity fund, there's a very high threshold for a minimum investment amount, where we want to bring higher quality investments that typical smaller investors don't have access to, but collectively we want to give them access into an entity that they can invest in. So collectively they can hit that minimum investment to give them access to hedge funds or private equity funds that would be considered private placements, but typically for qualified buyers or much higher valued investors.
Right. And that's the exciting thing about Capital2Market is that most investors don't have access these types of investments. So what you're doing at Capital2Market, I think, is super exciting because it's going to give more and more investors, retirement investors, access to these private placement types investments where you can invest in startups or growing companies or investment funds that potentially could have some really significant returns.
Absolutely. And I think one of the biggest creators of a wealth gap in this country was that most non-accredited or non-wealthy people could not invest in commercial real estate. Well, now we'll be able to break down those barriers through two other exemptions that we haven't discussed yet. One would be Regulation A+, and the other one would be Regulation CF. And what those types of exemptions allow private companies to do is to advertise as a private entity, and to raise capital through their customer base or affiliation group or affinity group, but also to be able to accept investments from lower qualified investors, which would be called non-accredited investors that would be below that threshold that we discussed on the accredited definition.
All right. So obviously, private placements, super important source of capital for many businesses in this country, along with investment funds who typically could also invest in growing companies like private equity funds or venture capital funds. So that's it. Now I actually understand what a private placement is. So thanks a lot, Victor. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. You should now have no doubt as to what a private placement is.